The slap came so fast, I couldn't even breathe. The sharp sound of skin striking skin cracked through the funeral home, crisp and cold, cutting off every whisper in the room. My glasses fell, sliding across the damp stone floor, glistening with mist. I looked around. Lilies, candles, faces frozen in silence. And there, in the middle of that solemn farewell, stood my daughter-in-law, Julia, her hand still trembling, her eyes locked on me without a trace of remorse. "That's the price of stubbornness," she said softly, but her voice carried like a verdict. "That house no longer belongs to you." I didn't answer. I only felt the sting on my cheek and the deeper ache rising in my chest, not from the blow, but from the eyes of my son, Daniel, who stood there, unmoving, saying nothing. Henry, my husband, lay among the white flowers, and I understood then. Death was not the cruelest thing in life. I bent down to pick up my shattered glasses. Every gaze followed me, pitying, curious, or cold. But inside me, something cracked open and awakened all at once. Humiliated in my husband's funeral, and in that very moment, I knew it was time to reclaim everything. I am Martha Lewis, 70 years old. That morning, I sat in the front row of St. Mary's Funeral Home, looking at Henry's photo among the white wreaths. And I understood one thing: not every death marks the end of love. Sometimes, it simply opens the final chapter of what has long been hidden. The air inside the funeral home was cold and heavy with the scent of lilies. The steady sound of shoes on the floor, the rustling of wrapping paper, and soft sighs threaded through murmured condolences. I sat straight, holding in my hands the notebook Henry always carried. On the last page he had written, just hours before he passed, "Don't worry about me, Martha. Take care of our cafe. I'll still see you smiling there." I read those lines over and over for nights, still unable to believe Henry was truly gone. On the wooden table before me lay our wedding photo, two young souls from 45 years ago, smiling brightly in the morning scent of coffee. I still remember the first time I met Henry. He walked into the cafe when I was a girl in my early 20s. His shirt was dotted with raindrops, his hair dark, his smile gentle. "I heard people say, 'There's a kind of coffee here that makes you forget about time,'" he said. I laughed, handed him his first cup, and from that day on, he came every morning. A year later, we married and opened Morning Brew, a small cafe on the corner of Maple Street, the place that would later become the heart of my entire life. Now, Henry lay there, silent among the flowers and candlelight. I tightened my grip on the notebook, feeling as if a part of my past was being gently torn away from the present. The door of the funeral home opened, and Julia walked in. A fitted black dress, hair tied high, eyes cold and dry, without a single tear. Behind her was Daniel, my son, the 40-year-old man I once thought understood his mother better than anyone. But now, he looked away, his gaze evasive. Julia sat down beside me, adjusted her dress, then tilted her head slightly and said, in a soft but sharp tone, "Mother, I have some papers that need your signature. The lawyer said it would be easier if we take care of them early." I turned to her. "What papers?" She took a folder from her purse and placed it neatly on my lap. I glanced at it. It was the property transfer for the house on Maple Street. My first feeling wasn't anger, but coldness. Cold like that morning 2 weeks ago, at the cafe, when Henry was still in the hospital and Julia had stopped by with her polite concern. She had sat at the table near the window, sipped her cappuccino, and said in a voice as light as mist, "Mother, I know Dad's illness is serious. I don't want to bring this up now, but maybe we should plan ahead for the house. It'll make things less complicated later." I remember standing behind the counter, hearing the water boil, and asking, "What complications, Julia?" She smiled, eyes narrowing slightly. "The house is still in both your names. If anything happens, the paperwork could get messy. You know Daniel isn't good with documents. I just want to help." I replied simply, "As long as Henry is alive, everything still belongs to us." She shrugged. "Sure, but things can change quickly. Older people shouldn't worry about such matters." I said nothing more. I only looked out the window where rain began to fall on the wooden sign that read "Morning Brew." When I turned back, Julia was already gone, leaving behind the sharp scent of perfume and a half-finished cup of coffee. That memory rushed back like cold water. And now, at Henry's funeral, she brought the very same papers I had once refused to sign. I asked quietly, my voice hoarse, "Why today?" Julia didn't flinch. "Because right now is the most convenient time. Henry just passed, and his name is still on the documents. If you sign, the transfer will be fast and easy. You don't want to drag things out, do you?" I placed the folder back on my lap and looked at my son. "What do you think, Daniel?" He glanced at Julia, then said softly, "Mom, I think Julia's just trying to help. It's better to get it done soon." A chill ran down my spine. The little boy I once taught to walk could no longer stand firm beside his mother. I spoke slowly, each word heavier than the air itself. "That house is what your father and I built with our whole lives. It's not something to bargain over." Julia's lips curved slightly. "Then sign it, or we'll find another way. You don't want trouble, do you?" I looked at her, then shook my head. "No." All the sounds in the room seemed to stop. Julia stood up, her face changing color. She raised her hand and slapped me. The blow came so fast I couldn't react. My glasses flew, shattering across the funeral home floor, sharp and glinting. I staggered, but stayed upright. The scent of lilies filled my nose, sweet to the point of nausea. I saw a few guests lower their eyes, avoiding mine. Daniel stepped forward, grasping Julia's shoulder, whispering, "Stop it." But she jerked away, her voice harsh. "She's just selfish. Henry's gone, and she still wants to keep everything. A woman like her doesn't deserve that house." I looked at my son. Daniel said nothing. He only bowed his head. I turned to Henry's photo and whispered, "Do you see, Henry? People can wait a lifetime to love, but it only takes a second to betray." I placed the small notebook beside his picture and walked out. No one stopped me. The sound of rain outside was like a farewell. I opened my car door and sat down. In the rearview mirror, a red mark burned on my cheek, but my eyes were clear. I picked up my phone and dialed Charles Benton, Henry's old lawyer. "Charles," I said, my voice calm and steady, I need to see you this afternoon about Henry's will. I ended the call and looked up at the gray sky. Some losses break you, but some losses wake you up. That afternoon, the rain still hadn't stopped. Long streaks of water clung to the car windows, glittering under the soft yellow light. I sat still for a long time before starting the engine, not because I was afraid of the rain, but because I wasn't ready to face the silence inside an empty house. The road to Maple Street was deserted. The wind whipped through the trees, carrying the damp scent of decaying leaves and cold earth. When I turned into the narrow lane, I saw a familiar black car parked in front of the cafe. The glass door reflected the blurred silhouette of someone waiting. It was Charles Benton. He had arrived before me. When I opened the door, the small bell above it rang softly. The scent of morning coffee lingered, mingled with the dampness of rain. Charles took off his coat, hung it on the rack, and looked at me in silence. He didn't ask anything, just placed his leather briefcase on the table. "I heard what happened at the funeral," he said in a low voice. "Someone told me." "I know," I replied evenly. News travels fast. In this town, no one ever misses a story they can tell over a cup of coffee. He sat down, fingers interlaced. "I didn't come to talk about that. I came to protect you, Martha. Henry once told me that if anything ever happened, I should help you keep everything intact." I looked at him. He was always the cautious one. When he was alive, Henry trusted others more easily than I did. But now? I paused, then gave a faint smile. Now I understand he was right about one thing. People show their true nature only when there's no one left to impress. Charles opened the briefcase and took out a stack of papers. "This is a copy of Henry's will. He re-signed it last year after his first hospital stay. The house, the cafe, and all savings belong to you. Daniel will inherit only a small portion after your passing. Henry believed you'd know how to take care of everything." I nodded slightly. "I know that, Will. But Julia doesn't believe it. She thinks I'll be easy to break." "I can issue a legal warning," Charles said. "If Julia or Daniel tries to interfere, all you need to do is say the word." I looked out the window. Raindrops tapped against the wooden sign that read, "Morning Brew." Across the street, a few neighbors stood under the awning, pointing toward the cafe. They whispered something, then quietly turned away. I knew what they were talking about. The slap, the funeral, the mother humiliated by her daughter-in-law. "I don't want a lawsuit," I said. "I just want peace." But peace seems to be the rarest thing these days. Charles was silent for a moment, then asked gently, "Has Daniel called you?" I gave a faint, joyless smile. "No, he doesn't have the courage, but Julia will call. She always needs to be the one in control." Just as I predicted, that evening the phone rang. I sat in the living room, the warm yellow light shining over my wrinkled hands, resting on my knees. The name Julia Lewis appeared on the screen. I picked up. "Mother," her cold voice said, "you embarrass me in front of everyone. At the funeral, in front of family and reporters. Do you have any idea what people are saying about this family?" I replied evenly. "All I remember is being slapped in front of my husband, who had just passed away. Tell me, Julia, whose dignity do you think was really damaged?" Her voice rose sharply. "You're ruining Daniel. His boss scolded him because of this. You always think you're right, but all you do is make people pity you. I exhaled softly. If pity is the price I have to pay to keep my self-respect, I'll pay it gladly. There was a brief silence on the other end. Then Julia said, her voice trembling with anger, "You'll regret this. You have no one but Daniel. When he leaves you, all you'll have left is that empty house." I answered slowly, "Better to live in an empty house than share it with someone who poisons it." I hung up. Outside, the wind lashed through the trees. I heard the cafe sign rattle, like one of Henry's weary sighs. I went downstairs and made myself a cup of espresso. The grinder hummed steadily, and the aroma of coffee filled the room. In the mirror behind the counter, I saw my reflection, tired but steady. As I sat down, the door opened. Clara Ward, my elderly neighbor, stepped inside. "Martha," she said softly, "I heard what happened. That woman went too far. But you should be careful. Julia's been saying you're not in your right mind, that you need a guardian." I looked up. "A guardian?" Clara nodded. "They're saying you've been unstable, can't control your emotions, maybe even a danger to yourself. They're preparing to file a petition in court." I smiled. A cold, unfamiliar smile. So that's it. The slap wasn't out of anger. It was to create evidence. Clara took my hand. "You can't stay silent anymore, Martha." I looked out the window. The rain was still falling. "No, but I won't scream either. I'll let them speak. And when they do, their own words will destroy them." Clara said nothing. We sat together, listening to the rain drumming on the metal roof. I thought of Henry. He once said, "When someone hurts you, don't strike back with anger. Let time do the work." I looked at his photo on the wall, the gentle eyes that still seemed to watch over me. "My love," I whispered, "I never thought I'd have to defend your honor this way. But maybe this is the only way for you to rest in peace." I stood, picked up the phone, and dialed Charles Benton. "Charles," I said, my voice calm and steady, "tomorrow I'll sign over full authorization to you. If they want to fight legally, I won't run, but I want to choose the battlefield myself." "What are you planning, Martha?" he asked. I looked out at the rain, where the streetlights shimmered on the wet pavement. "I plan to return to them what they gave me today, humiliation. But in my own way." The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window, thin and gentle, like a quiet reassurance. I hadn't slept all night. The same thoughts kept circling in my mind. The slap at the funeral, Daniel's lowered eyes, and Julia's voice sharp as a blade. But this morning, I wasn't trembling anymore. I had come to understand one thing. When someone strikes at your dignity, the only way to rise is to make sure they never get the chance to do it again. I put on Henry's old wool coat, brewed a strong pot of coffee, and unlocked the cafe door. The smell of coffee rose up, blending with the crisp air after the rain. I looked out to the street. Everything seemed normal. People heading to work, buses stopping at the corner, the world moving on, indifferent to what had happened in the funeral home yesterday. But something inside me had shifted. Around noon, Charles Benton arrived. He carried a new stack of papers and a tense expression. "I just got word," he said, taking a seat. "Julia and Daniel have filed a petition with the county court. They're requesting a mental competency evaluation. They're claiming you've shown signs of instability, emotional outbursts, and an inability to manage your assets. I wasn't surprised. I only gave a faint smile. That was fast. They couldn't even wait 3 days after the funeral. Charles looked at me seriously. If the court agrees to review it, they could freeze your accounts during the investigation. But I have a plan. I took a sip of coffee, waiting for him to continue. Henry once asked me to hold a separate copy of his will with witness signatures. It wasn't filed in the system, but it's legally valid. He handwrote an additional note at the end. If anyone questions Martha's capability, let her prove it through action, not words. I smiled softly. Henry always understood me, and I already know what my first action will be. What's that? Charles asked. I'll reopen the cafe as if nothing happened. And I'll let the whole town see that the woman they call unfit can still run everything with reason. Charles started to protest, but I stopped him. Don't worry. I'm not driven by anger. I'm driven by truth. 2 days later, Morning Brew was busier than it had been in months. Maybe because of the rumors. People came in, sipping their coffee while watching me, as if witnessing a performance. I went about my work as usual, careful, calm, saying only what was necessary. Clara helped me carry trays. She whispered, "You're silencing them this way." I smiled. Sometimes calmness frightens people more than shouting ever could. Midway through the day, the door opened. Julia walked in. Red dress, red lips, perfume so strong it made the air heavy. Everyone turned to look. She strode straight to the counter. "Mother, I need to talk to you." I didn't look up. If it's about coffee, I'm afraid all I have left today is the bitter kind. She pressed her hand on the counter, voice tight. "What are you trying to do? The whole town's talking. Daniel's too embarrassed to leave the house." I poured the coffee into a porcelain cup, my tone even. "I'm only doing what Henry wanted. Living on." Julia gave a sharp laugh. "Living? You call this living? Pretending to be strong while everyone sees you losing control?" I met her eyes. "Julia, there's one thing you don't understand. Control doesn't come from raising your voice. It comes from knowing when to stay silent while others shout." For a second, she froze. The cafe went quiet. Everyone seemed to hold their breath. Julia clenched her jaw and hissed, "You'll lose. I've gathered enough evidence. The court will take that house from you." I wiped my hands on my apron and said softly, "Then go ahead. But be sure to sign it with your conscience because I doubt you have much of that left." Julia turned and stormed out. The door closed behind her and the bell above it rang again, small but clear. That afternoon, Charles called. "Martha, I've got good news. A witness from the funeral has come forward. She's willing to testify that Julia struck you first. If the court requests an evaluation, we'll have proof that you responded only verbally and calmly." "Who is she?" I asked. "The young woman who handled the sound system at the service. She said she can't forget seeing Julia slap you. She said it was enough to make everyone ashamed." I was silent for a moment, then said, "Sometimes truth doesn't need protection. It finds its own way." Charles chuckled through the phone. "And sometimes it chooses the right person to walk beside it. Do you want me to make the witness public? Not yet, I said. Let them think I'm staying quiet. When people believe they've won, they start saying things they shouldn't. Night fell. I sat by the window, streetlights spilling across the room. On the table sat my third cup of coffee for the day, more bitter than usual, but it kept my mind sharp. I opened the drawer and took out Henry's notebook. Between the familiar pages, I found a folded slip of paper. If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer beside you. Don't let anyone convince you that you're weak. You're stronger than they'll ever know. And if someone tries to take what's ours, let justice speak, not vengeance. I set the paper back down and smiled faintly. My love, that's exactly what I'll do. 3 days later, I received a notice from the county court. The preliminary hearing was scheduled in 2 weeks. Julia must have expected me to panic. Instead, I sent back a formal response. Not a defense, but a petition to reopen Henry's official will, certified by Charles. In the letter, I wrote, I, Martha Lewis, do not object to evaluation. I am fully prepared to demonstrate my capacity and to let the court determine whether being struck across the face at my husband's funeral falls under moral or legal concern. I believe justice requires no shouting, only truth. After reading the letter, Charles was quiet for a long moment, then said, You've just turned the tables, Martha. They never expected you to fight with reason. I replied softly, There's nothing more dangerous than a woman who has nothing left to lose, except her dignity. That night, I sat alone in the cafe, listening to the wind brush against the windows. A few regulars stopped by. No one asked questions. They just nodded in greeting, and I knew. Sometimes silence is its own form of solidarity. I looked up at Henry's photo on the wall, his eyes still gentle, still watching over me. My love, I whispered, they think I'm weak. But it's weakness that teaches us how to fight back without losing ourselves. Outside, the rain began again, scattering glass-like drops across the awning. I stood, turned off the lights, and in the darkness, I heard my own voice, calm and quiet. The game has just begun. 2 weeks passed slowly, as if time itself were watching me. Every morning, I still opened morning brew at 8 sharp, brewed coffee as usual, and greeted customers with a calm smile. But inside, I knew I was moving toward one final confrontation. Not to win, but to reclaim the truth. On the day of the hearing, the sky was gray and heavy with early winter air. I wore the gray coat Henry had bought me years ago from a small shop near the docks. Its fabric a little worn, but still warm. Before leaving, I poured a small cup of coffee and placed it before his photo. You stay here, I whispered. Let me go alone. But watch over me, will you? The county courthouse stood in the center of town. When I walked in, Julia and Daniel were already there, sitting side by side across the room. Julia wore a dark blue suit, her makeup flawless. She turned to look at me, her eyes glinting with a trace of mockery. Daniel kept his gaze down, avoiding mine. Next to me was Charles Benton, composed and precise as always. He placed a steady hand on my shoulder, a quiet reassurance that spoke more than words. The judge entered, his tone firm but not unkind. He opened the file and glanced across both sides. Case number 4812. Petition for mental competency, evaluation of Mrs. Martha Lewis. Filed by Mr. Daniel Lewis and Mrs. Julia Lewis. His voice rang through the warm wooden chamber, clear as a strike of metal. Julia was the first to speak. Your Honor, she began smoothly, we don't wish to cause trouble. But since my father's passing, my mother, Mrs. Martha Lewis, has shown troubling behavior. She lost control, created a scene at the funeral, publicly humiliated her son, and refused to cooperate on shared property matters. We only want to ensure all legal procedures are handled safely and properly. I watched her without a word. Her hands trembled slightly, perhaps from the cold, or perhaps from fear of what she couldn't predict. The judge nodded and turned to me. Mrs. Lewis, would you like to respond? I stood. My voice was low but steady. Your Honor, my name is Martha Lewis, 70 years old. I've run my coffee shop for 30 years. I've never needed a guardian, never needed anyone's permission to live as an ordinary person. I am not here to fight my son, but to defend the dignity of my late husband, Mr. Henry Lewis. The courtroom went silent. I drew a breath and continued. At my husband's funeral, my daughter-in-law, Mrs. Julia Lewis, asked me to sign over the house, right there, beside his coffin. When I refused, she slapped me. Many witnessed it. I didn't press charges, thinking perhaps grief made her act rashly. But now, when they say I've lost control, I must ask, can someone who chose silence in the face of violence truly be called unstable? Julia gave a short, brittle laugh. Words aren't evidence. I turned to Charles. He nodded. Your Honor, we have a witness. The door opened. A young woman entered. Blonde hair, white blouse. I recognized her immediately. The sound technician from the funeral home. She stood before the court, her voice trembling slightly but clear. I was there that day. I saw Mrs. Julia strike Mrs. Martha. Mrs. Martha didn't retaliate. She simply left quietly. There was no disturbance, no outburst. Julia's face paled. Her lips tightened. The judge made notes, then looked to Charles. Any further evidence? Charles opened his briefcase and produced an envelope. This is a handwritten copy of Mr. Henry Lewis's will, legally witnessed and certified. It includes a specific clause. If anyone questions Martha's capability, let her prove it through action, not words. The judge read the line, then looked up. Mrs. Lewis, what have you done these past 2 weeks? I've opened my cafe every day, Your Honor, I said. I've brewed coffee, kept the books, paid the bills, and served my customers. I've lived, worked, and stayed calm. I may not be young, but my mind is clear enough to tell the difference between right and greed. The judge's pen moved across the paper, the faint scratching sound ringing louder than anything else in the room. Julia suddenly stood. Your Honor, my mother is manipulating emotions. She's always tried to control Daniel. The judge raised a hand. That's enough, Mrs. Lewis. I've heard enough. He set his pen down, his voice decisive. Based on witness testimony, presented documents, and the conduct of the respondent during the past 2 weeks, the court hereby dismisses the petition for evaluation. Mrs. Martha Lewis is found fully competent. Furthermore, this court recommends an inquiry into possible elder abuse and financial coercion under Civil Code Section 3.21. The courtroom fell silent. Julia's face drained of color. Daniel lifted his eyes to me, conflicted, searching, as if trying to believe what he'd just heard. The judge gave me a small nod. "Mrs. Lewis, would you like to say anything else?" I rose slowly. "Your Honor, only this. Justice isn't revenge. It's how people relearn respect." When I stepped outside, the clouds had broken. Sunlight spilled across the courthouse steps, glowing like thin gold. Charles walked beside me, files tucked under his arm. "You won, Martha," he said. "But more than that, you stayed true to yourself." I smiled faintly. Winning doesn't mean much at my age. I just wanted what Henry left behind to stay at peace. He used to say, "Justice never comes late. It just waits until people are patient enough to receive it." Behind us, Julia swept past without looking at me. Daniel followed more slowly. He stopped, hesitated, then said softly, "Mom, I'm sorry." I met his eyes, my expression softening. "No need to be sorry, Daniel. Just remember, trust is the only thing you can't inherit." He lowered his head. "Julia won't stop." "I know," I said. "But now she has to fight her own reflection. As for me, I'll just live." That afternoon, I returned to the cafe. Late sunlight filtered through the windows, glinting off the polished wooden tables. I brewed an espresso, the rich aroma spreading through the room, warm, familiar. Clara walked in, smiling gently. "The whole town's talking about you. They're calling you the woman who made justice smile." Chuckled. "Justice doesn't smile, Clara. It just waits, quietly, for people to see it." I looked out to the street, where shadows stretched across the calm pavement. The air was light, the sky clear, a peaceful afternoon after the storm. I took a sip of coffee and said softly, as if to Henry, "You see, my love? I didn't scream. I didn't seek revenge. I just stood tall." In the fading light, the photo of him on the wall seemed to smile back. I once thought that victory would bring me peace. But strangely, after leaving the courthouse that day, what I felt wasn't triumph. It was a deep, quiet sadness. Perhaps because when justice speaks, it not only exposes the wrongs of others, but also illuminates the wounds within ourselves. In the days following the trial, Morning Brew returned to its steady rhythm. People stopped gossiping. They simply greeted me softly when they walked in. Some placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "You did the right thing, Martha. Henry would be proud." I only smiled, thanked them, and went back to brewing coffee. Yet each time I looked out the window, down Maple Street, stretching past the old houses, I saw Daniel, as a boy, running in worn sneakers, laughing uncontrollably, while Henry lifted him high onto his shoulders. Now, between my son and me, there was a silence that words couldn't cross. That afternoon, the sky was clear, the sunlight faint through the trees. I was rearranging the coffee shelves when I heard a car stop outside. It was Daniel. He stepped in, silent, took off his hat, and glanced around the cafe. I kept my voice even. "What will you have?" "Cappuccino," he said. "Like the one you used to make when I was little." I nodded. As the milk steamer hissed, the scent of coffee filled the room. Warm, familiar. Daniel sat by the window, the very seat Henry used to take each morning. When I set the cup down in front of him, he said quietly, "I'm sorry, Mom." I sat across from him, resting my hand on a cold cup of tea. For the hearing or for the slap at your father's funeral? He lowered his head. For all of it. I was wrong. I let Julia pull me too far until I couldn't even see which side I was standing on. I looked at my son and saw genuine remorse in his eyes, but also fear. The fear of losing, of being alone, of admitting that the person you loved wasn't who you thought they were. Where's Julia? I asked. She left, he said hoarsely. After the court ruling, she packed up and said she didn't want to stay here anymore. I didn't stop her. I stayed silent for a while. Outside, the wind brushed lightly against the wooden Morning Brew sign. Daniel, I said slowly, people can lose everything. Money, homes, work, but they mustn't lose themselves. That's the one thing no one can redeem for you. He nodded, eyes red. I know. Can you forgive me? I smiled, a tired but genuine smile. Forgiveness isn't a gift, Daniel. It's a decision. And I made that decision the moment you called me mother in court, not her. Tears rolled down his cheeks. I didn't reach out to hug him. I just placed my hand on the table. Your father used to say that adults truly grow up only when they take responsibility for the pain they cause. Today, you did that. He nodded and took a deep breath. Mom, I want to help you run the cafe, not for the money. I just want to start over, here. I looked at him and saw in his face the calm kindness Henry used to carry on winter mornings. If you mean it, start by washing the cups. Everyone starts there. Daniel laughed through his tears. Yes, ma'am. In the days that followed, I saw old scenes come back, but in a different light. Daniel opened the cafe each morning, set the tables, cleaned the counters. He didn't talk much, he just worked. One day, a customer recognized him and joked, "You're Mrs. Martha's son, right? Helping out now?" Daniel smiled softly, helping and learning. I stood behind the counter, hearing that, and felt warmth spread through me. One morning, Charles stopped by, holding an envelope. Martha, the property documents have been updated under your name per the official will. Everything's in order. I took it without opening. Thank you, Charles. Now, Henry can rest in peace. He looked toward Daniel, wiping tables. Seems you've helped him find himself again, too. I looked out the window where sunlight touched the frame. No, Charles. I just opened the door. Walking through it was his choice. One evening after closing, Daniel and I sat together. He poured me a cup of tea, his hands trembling slightly. Mom, he said, Julia called. She apologized. She said she wants to return her share of the property, said she doesn't want any part of it anymore. I nodded. She can keep it. I don't need it. What I needed, I already have back. He looked at me. What's that? You. He bowed his head. No more words were needed. Outside, the night wind carried the scent of freshly roasted coffee, mingling with the soft chime of the wind bells. I looked up at Henry's photo. The golden light from the lamp reflected off the frame, and for a moment, it felt like he was smiling. My love, I whispered inwardly. I kept my promise, not through anger, but through grace. The next morning, I hung a small new sign at the cafe entrance. No cup of coffee stays bitter forever. Given time, bitterness becomes aroma. A customer read it and asked, Who wrote that, Martha? I smiled. Someone who once thought she'd lost everything. And as I looked at Daniel making coffee, the morning sunlight fell across his face. In that moment, I saw Henry, not in his features, but in his quiet, steady warmth. Justice had done its part. As for me, the rest was forgiveness, not to forget, but to live on. The following spring, my small town bloomed in gentle shades of color. Cherry blossoms lined Maple Street, their delicate petals drifting down onto the roof of Morning Brew. I still rose early each day, boiled water, brewed coffee, and opened the windows to let the morning light spill in. The scent of coffee mingled with the soft spring breeze, familiar and tender like Henry's breath whenever he said, "Good morning, my love." I had lived through a season of grief, a season of betrayal, and a season of justice. And now, what remained was peace. Daniel came to the cafe every day, but he was no longer the son bowed by guilt. Now, he smiled. He chatted with customers. He wiped coffee cups until they shone. He did everything slowly, carefully, not out of fear of being wrong, but from the desire to do things right. One morning, as I was recording the day's sales, he placed a sheet of paper before me. "Mom," he said, "I re-registered the cafe's name. It's under my name now, but you'll always be the honorary owner. I want to keep the cafe not as a reminder of my mistakes, but of how we overcame them." I looked at his signature, neat, firm, confident. "Your father would be proud," I said softly. "This cafe was once our beginning, Daniel. Now, it's yours." He smiled, and in that smile, I saw Henry again, the same smile that once convinced me to marry a man who made terrible coffee but believed love could fix anything. That afternoon, Charles Benton stopped by, carrying a small bouquet of lavender, the kind Henry used to grow behind our house. "I heard from Daniel that you're selling the house?" I nodded. "Yes, it's too big for one person. I'm moving to the cottage by the lake, near the path Henry and I used to walk." He placed the bouquet on the table and smiled. "And the cafe?" "Daniel will keep it," I replied. "I don't need to stand behind the counter anymore. I want to sit by the window and watch others begin." Charles looked at me, his voice low. "You make me think that justice isn't an ending. It's a road that leads to peace." I smiled faintly. "Henry used to say, 'Justice is not revenge, it's education.' I learned that late, but at least I learned." He was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "If one day you need someone to walk with you by the lake, just call." "I still haven't learned how to make coffee as well as you," I answered with a gentle, calm smile. "Keep practicing, Charles. Everyone needs to relearn something in life." I packed my things on a sunny day. The old house on Maple Street was filled with memories, photos, notebooks, Henry's worn sweaters. Yet, I didn't feel the sadness I expected. Each item had its place, and as I set them down, I felt as though I was laying pieces of my life to rest. That evening, Daniel helped me box up books. He opened one of Henry's old notebooks, pages of coffee, recipes, and notes. At the very end, there was a line I had never noticed before. "If one day Morning Brew no longer belongs to us, let it become a place where someone else can find themselves again." I looked at Daniel. "Now you understand why your father loved this place so much. don't you?" He nodded, because it didn't just sell coffee. It sold belief. On the day I moved, the sky was crystal clear. Daniel stood in front of the cafe and handed me a new key. "Mom, I'm going to change a few things, add a reading corner, maybe a piano, but I promise I'll keep the morning aroma of coffee." I took the key, holding it tightly in my palm. "Don't keep the aroma, Daniel. Keep the way you brew it, with respect." He nodded and hugged me tightly. When I walked away, I didn't look back. Not because I didn't want to, but because some places you only leave once your heart is truly at peace. The little cottage by the lake was wonderfully quiet. Every morning, I sat by the window, reading, brewing coffee, watching sunlight dance on the water. Wild ducks glided by, leaving small ripples in their wake. Sometimes Daniel stopped in, bringing a bag of freshly baked pastries. Occasionally, Charles came along, holding another bouquet of lavender. We would sit on the porch, talking about Henry, the cafe, the town. One afternoon, Daniel asked, "Mom, if you could go back to the day of the funeral, would you do anything differently?" I looked into the distance and smiled. No, because without that day, I would never have understood the strength of silence. And you, my dear, might never have learned how to speak honestly. He held my hand. "Thank you, Mom, not just for forgiving me, but for teaching me how to stop running." I squeezed his hand gently, eyes resting on the lake, gilded by the setting sun. "There's nothing to thank me for, Daniel. It's all just part of the journey. We all have our wrongs, our rights, our debts to pay. The difference lies in whether we're willing to learn from them." Late at night, I sat down to write in a new notebook, not Henry's, but mine. On the first page, I wrote, "At my husband's funeral, my daughter-in-law slapped me in the face, and that day, I began to live again." My hand trembled slightly, but the words were clear. I closed the book and listened to the whisper of the night. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of coffee from the cafe across the lake. Bittersweet, warm, and real. I smiled and spoke softly, as if Henry were sitting beside me. "My love, I finally understand that peace isn't something given to us. It's something we choose every morning when we brew the first cup of coffee." Outside, the sky was filled with stars. The moonlight shimmered on the water like a quiet ribbon of silver. I closed my eyes and listened to the slow rhythm of my heart. No longer the beat of pain, but the steady pulse of a life reclaimed. If you've stayed until now, thank you, truly. My story might stir pain in some, but maybe, for others, it will be a reminder that sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's the beginning of a different way to live. And what about you? If you were Martha, what would you do after that slap? Stay silent, forgive, or strike back? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear the story from your perspective. If you enjoy stories like this, real slices of human emotion, of pain, and of rebirth, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share so more people can feel and reflect alongside us. Every listen, every comment from you is a small but powerful reason for me to keep writing, telling, and spreading stories that touch the heart. Thank you for staying until the end. See you in the next story, where perhaps you'll find a piece of yourself somewhere within it.